Chapter 1. Where the hell was Johnny? The kid was always up to something, and it usually meant trouble. He should have been there by now. They should have already shaken the dust of this one-horse town. The man known as the Laredo Kid, although he was much too old to be a kid, now nearing his mid-30s, had been waiting for his current riding partner, Johnny Royal, for nearly half an hour. He stood there, in front of the livery stable, holding the reins of his dun black horse loosely with his left hand. He reached with his right for the pocket watch from his vest pocket beneath his corduroy brown jacket. He checked the time for the umpteenth time, as if he didn't already know it. He grimaced. 9 a.m.? He squinted up at the rising morning sun as it was just clearing the rooftops of the dumpy little town of Mudflats. His slate-gray eyes darkened with concern and apprehension. He was pretty sure now that they would not be leaving this hick town without trouble. Johnny had already retrieved his sorrel from the livery before Laredo arrived. He knew his young companion must be up to something, and from experience, he knew it wouldn't be good. Johnny had lost a bundle at the gambling tables at the Lucky Dog Saloon the night before. Without coins jingling in his jeans, Johnny would be on the prod for cash. Johnny was a good-natured cuss, and Laredo liked him despite his recklessness and penchant for other people's money. Laredo did not share his buddy's dishonest traits, and the outlaw trail was not to his liking, but due to circumstances that seemed to constantly dog his very existence, he had found himself often in the company of thieves and bad men in general. Somehow, he had become known as the Laredo Kid, and had long since been riding the Owl Hoot Trail. He had been riding with Pike Grant's bunch when he met Johnny. Finding it difficult to back out of it, Laredo was reluctantly a part of a bank robbery that went sour in Durango. The law had gotten word somehow and had been waiting in ambush. The gang, save for the one left behind, dead in the hot, dusty street, fled in all directions, with Johnny and Laredo lighting out on a trail of their own. They had traveled together now for 3 months, and Laredo had tried to steer Johnny from wrong paths and avoid trouble for both of them. A time or two they had tried their hands at honest work, but Johnny was a force to be reckoned with. Gunshots from the center of town broke the stillness of the crisp early morning air. Laredo knew instinctively that Johnny was mixed up in the gunfire. Johnny had found his trouble once more. Laredo knew this was it. It was time to get out of town, and fast. As he swung into the saddle, Johnny's sorrel came sliding around the corner of the next cross street down the way. Johnny's overgrown shock of blonde hair flew in the breeze behind him, beneath his tied-down flat-crowned gray hat with a bullet hole in the front right corner of the crown. "We've got to get out of here," he yelled as he approached Laredo. "I just robbed the bank." Laredo was not surprised. He had guessed as much. Without a word, he spurred his horse and urged him forward. The two riders sped out of town in a cloud of dust. They pushed their horses hard at a full gallop. Once they passed the town limits, they turned their mounts southward without slowing and continued the pace for another 10 minutes. The hard riding was taking its toll on the horses, and after a while, they let them slow to a trot, then a walk. Finally, they stopped completely to let the horses blow. They looked back for signs of a posse, but saw none. It was too soon. It would take time for a posse to be organized, but one thing was certain. It would be formed and on Laredo's and Johnny's trail soon. "Don't say it," Johnny smirked. Laredo's face was stony, and he sat quiet in his saddle. "We needed the cash," Johnny added. "Besides, nobody got hurt." "I suppose so," Laredo sighed, disgruntled. "You just can't resist getting us into trouble, can you?" "Nope," Johnny chuckled. "Ain't it fun?" That impish childlike grin was disarming. "Yeah, lots of fun," Laredo said stonily. "Real hum-dinging corker fun. We can laugh all the way to jail and do a jig at the end of a rope." "Oh, don't be like that, kid. You gotta loosen up. Have fun." "Well then, let's have fun and get the hell away from here. Pronto, or we're going to be seeing a whole lot of fun climbing up our tail if we don't get moving. Laredo kicked his mount into a trot and rode on. Stuffy old man, Johnny shouted with a grin and followed suit. For an hour, they kept a steady pace, saving their horses as much as possible. The sun rose to its apex, and the day was steaming hot as they rode farther and farther into the Badlands, threading their way through the dry country covered with mesquite and manzanita, and climbing into the higher elevations covered with rock and shale. Occasionally, they would stop and rest the horses and look back over their trail, always expecting the posse on their heels. The day wore on, and by almost mid-afternoon, they spotted a dust cloud on the horizon, about a mile back. Posse! They turned their mounts sharply to the east and spurred them into a gallop, even though the horses were near played out and needed rest, water, and graze. Eventually, they would have to hole up someplace. Laredo remembered a hideout high up in the hills, just over the border into New Mexico, they had used while riding with Pike Grant. They would head for there and hopefully lose the posse in the hard rock country. 2 hours later, the dust cloud behind them was no longer just a cloud. The posse had gained on them and was close enough to be seen now. There was, possibly, a dozen men. Johnny's and Laredo's horses were blowing hard, and lather foamed on their chests and flanks. Their footing was faltering as they climbed the rock slopes, shale sliding beneath their hooves. "We'll have to lead them on foot," Laredo shouted, leaping to the ground and pulling the reins of his mount, leading him up the incline. Johnny followed his lead, dismounted, and led his mount close behind Laredo's. It was slow going, and from time to time, they sent furtive glances behind them, and each time seeing the posse approaching closer and closer behind and below them. Slipping and sliding, they continued upward, sweat beading on their dusty faces, and their horses neighing and snorting in protest as they fought the sliding rock beneath their hooves and protested against the pull of the reins and sharpness of the bits in their mouths. Something like the sound of a bee buzzed past Johnny's ear. Then he heard the report of a rifle. The slug bounced off the boulder in front of him with an ugly whine. Johnny twisted around, eyes wide. The posse was close now. Rifle range for sure. Soon pistol range would be achieved, and the two fleeing partners were still struggling up the face of the rocky scree. Johnny pulled his Winchester from the saddle boot, levered around, and still holding the reins, he lifted the weapon, returned fire, and then, without looking to see if he had hit anyone, he turned to continue leading his horse. A hail of bullets was the retort from the posse. Dust and rock fragments kicked up around their heels, and ricochets pinged off the rocks in front of them. "We've got to get out of here," Laredo shouted, now dragging his mount to the top of the rise. Johnny levered his weapon 3 more times, spraying lead at the pursuing posse. The posse was directly beneath them now, leaping from their saddles and seeking cover behind the rocks below as Johnny's bullets whizzed over their heads. Laredo had finally topped the rise, pulled his horse over the ledge and out of sight. He dropped the reins, pulled his rifle from the boot, and ran back toward the rim of the rise. Here he found a large boulder for cover. He pressed his back against it, peered out to see Johnny still struggling up the bank and returning fire as bullets flew around him. He leaned out around the boulder, raised his weapon, and bracing it against the rock, he fired rapidly, laying down a field of fire, swinging the barrel methodically from left to right and back again, squeezing off round after round. The posse's return fire was silenced momentarily as they scrambled like rabbits into their protective holes for cover, allowing Johnny to reach the top of the rise, himself, and take cover behind the boulder next to Laredo. Continued firing sent the posse men back into their protective holes for cover. Together, the two partners fired relentlessly until the posse men started to retreat toward their horses that had skittered away from the excitement. Johnny and Laredo continued firing as the men ran, with no intent of hitting anyone, allowing them the opportunity to catch up their mounts and ride away. They were still firing, but not as rapidly as they watched the posse disappear into dust along the back trail. The firing slowed and then ceased as the posse continued to disappear over the far horizon. Laredo half grinned and then grimaced. We'd better get going before they decide to come back. If we can make it across the border first, we can rest there. He turned to his horse, gathered up the reins, swung into the saddle, and started down the other side of the rise. Johnny stepped into the stirrups, seated himself, heavily, and lit out after his friend. They rode fast, their horses still laboring with near exhaustion. It wasn't long after they had crossed the border that Laredo slowed his horse to a walk. He looked back for Johnny and noticed that he had fallen somewhat behind. A second look told him something was wrong. Johnny's horse was staggering, and Johnny sat slumped over in the saddle, a strained look on his face. Laredo turned his mount and rode back to his companion. The boy's face was ghastly pale, and he clutched desperately to the pommel of his saddle. A large circle of blood soaked his shirt on the right side. "Sorry, kid," Johnny coughed as Laredo rode close. "I guess I caught one." Laredo sidestepped his pony to Johnny's side. He felt the wound and knew it was bad. "Hang on, Johnny, until we get to the hideout. I'll fix you up. Don't worry." Johnny nodded and kneed his mount forward. "Sure, kid, I'll be fine. I can make it." But he knew better. It was dark by the time they found the secluded arroyo in a deep canyon. They were still several miles from the hideout they had used before, but Johnny would never make it that far, and this spot was as good as any to hole up for a while. Johnny was doubled over his sorrel's neck as they rode slowly to a grassy spot hidden by thick brush and cottonwood trees. Laredo dismounted and eased Johnny from his saddle, catching him in his arms and laying him down on the soft grass. He lifted Johnny's head and held the canteen to his parched lips. Johnny's eyes flickered and dulled as his sparkling life drained from him. He coughed as he tried to swallow. His throat was tight and the liquid could hardly pass through. He pushed the canteen away and shook his head. "Save it, kid. You'll need it. It's just wasted on me. I'm finished. You know it. We're both riding out of here, Johnny." No, I can't. I want you to promise me something. Will you do it for me?" "Sure, Johnny, whatever you say." "See that my ma gets my share of the money. Will ya?" "You can do that yourself, Johnny." No need to kid me. He had a spasm, his breathing labored, then caught his breath and said, "Please, promise you'll do it. Please." Laredo choked back the gathering lump in his throat and agreed grimly, "Sure, Johnny." "Take care of her," Johnny gasped one last time, a death rattle in his throat. "Just like you would," Laredo promised, as he felt Johnny's body go limp and the last remaining spark of life expelled. He looked into Johnny's unseeing eyes for several seconds before he brushed his hand over his eyes and closed them. "Just like you would, Johnny," he whispered. Chapter 2. Denver, Colorado in 1884 was no longer a dusty trail town, but a sprawling, bustling city, displaying fast, encroaching civilization. Frontier lawmen gave way to a uniformed police force, and dusty range garb was replaced by suits and ties. Ladies now dressed in the latest of fashion. The man known as the Laredo Kid blended into the crowd. His black frock coat accented his broad shoulders and covered his pistol and holster. A black string tie accented his round, boyishly ruddy face, and a black, flat-crowned hat, tied by a chin strap, sat tilted on the back of his head, letting shocks of his light brown hair drape over his broad forehead. His striped pants were tucked into the tops of shiny black stovepipe boots that elevated his height to average. He had been here before with Johnny. Johnny, he thought as he meandered through the crowded street. Poor kid. Not a bad man, really, just young and restless. Sure, he had robbed and looted, but he never killed anyone. Laredo wished he could have said the same about himself. Now Johnny was gone, long before a man should. But such was the way of outlaw life. Once bought into it, the hand would have to be played out, and often it played out just the way it had for Johnny. He had buried Johnny in that grassy arroyo where he had died, with only 2 sticks tied together to make a cross as a marker on the spot. No name on the grave. The money from the bank job at Mud Flats was in Johnny's saddlebags. $7,000. Not much for his life. Also, in his bags, tied together in a bundle with a piece of string, were old letters from his mother in Sedalia, Missouri. They were addressed to Johnny Rowell, Box 13, Denver, Colorado. Since she had not used Johnny's real name, it was obvious that she was aware of Johnny's outlaw life and knew where the money came from that Johnny so dutifully sent her from each job. Her name was not Rowell, but Royal, Catherine Royal, the last name the same as Johnny's real one. Johnny had spent many nights around a campfire, telling Laredo about his mother and how one day he would seek out his father and take what was due him. He would then be able to take care of his mother in the style she deserved. Johnny's father was a rich and powerful cattleman in Wyoming, Kingston Royal. As his name implied, he thought of himself as a king. Thus, he was known as King Royal and was the monarch of the vast Royal Crown Ranch that covered over 100,000 acres in southwestern Wyoming. Johnny's mother had told him that King was a strict and pious man, and he had sent Johnny's mother and him away shortly after he was born. Claiming that Johnny was not his son, and accusing his mother of having an affair with his neighbor and biggest rival, Harvey Darrow of the Arrow Johnny always suspected that it was King himself, who had had indiscretions, and therefore was quick to assume the same of Johnny's mother. Johnny's mother was too ashamed to go back home to her family in Boston. The money that King Royal had given her to go away with took her only as far as Sedalia. Here she settled with Johnny and raised him alone. Even though King had continued to send money to Catherine, it was never enough to keep them going. She took in washing and sewing as well as odd jobs around the city. This left Johnny alone most of the time, and as a result, he grew up consorting with the wrong crowds and growing up wild. When Johnny was old enough, he went to work to help out. Life was tough, and work was scarce for a young boy, and he quickly learned there were other ways to get money. A fast gun and other people's money was quicker, although not always easy. His thoughts fading, and the purpose of his trip to Denver coming back into focus, the man called Laredo crossed the bustling street and entered the post office. Since he had been here before with Johnny, he hoped that, if anyone there remembered seeing him, that he would at least be confused as Johnny. Inside, the post office was already bristling with activity, although it was still early morning. Separate lines had formed in front of the 2 cages that were open. A third cage was closed. Laredo gazed at the post office walls and the assorted wanted posters. He was relieved to see none for the Laredo Kid. He waited his turn in the first line. When his turn came, a thin stoop-shouldered clerk with graying hair and a small mustache, who peered through round wire spectacles fitted halfway down his skinny nose, greeted him mechanically. "Help you?" "Mail for Johnny Rowell, Box 13, Laredo said. "Let me see," the clerk said, turning to the wall of pigeonholes behind him. "Yes, sir," he announced with a practiced smile. "One letter from Sedalia, Missouri." "Thanks," said Laredo as he took the envelope. "Will that be all, Mr. Rowell? Do you want anything else mailed?" "No, not right now," Laredo answered. He had stowed the bank money away in his hotel room and had waited to make sure he would pass as Johnny at the post office. If there had been trouble, he did not want to be caught with the money on him. He turned away from the cage and walked to the far corner of the room where no one else was standing. He opened the letter and read it. It was shorter than usual, and Johnny's mother was pleading for him to come home. She had been ill. Laredo's eyes darkened. He glanced up from the letter, thoughtfully wondering how he was going to tell her about Johnny. He knew now that he would not mail her the money, but would go to Sedalia himself. All of a sudden, he was jolted out of his reverie as he saw a squat, pot-bellied man step up behind the postal clerk, probably his supervisor. He whispered in the clerk's ear and nodded toward Laredo. The clerk glanced his way nervously and then quickly back as if trying to hide it. The clerk nodded understanding, glanced back Laredo's way one more time, and quickly left his post, scurrying out behind the cage and across the waiting room floor. He shot another hurried glance toward Laredo as he opened the door, then hustled outside. Had Laredo been recognized? Probably. He pushed the envelope into his inside coat pocket and left. Outside, the morning sun was rising higher, and the promise of another hot day was in the works. He looked up and down the street. The clerk had already disappeared. As he crossed the street, he glanced to his left and saw the clerk emerge from a saloon with a lean, tall man. "Don't panic," Laredo told himself. "It may be nothing." He continued across the street, turned to his left, and strode down the sidewalk. He dared not look back, but he needed to know if he was in fact being watched or followed. He casually stopped in front of the mercantile and turned as if looking at something in the window. The reflection told him that the tall man had crossed the street and stood leaning against a porch rail, lighting a cigar. He was too far away for Laredo to see him clearly, but his appearance was dark from the black derby hat, drooping black mustache, and black suit. After a moment, Laredo nonchalantly continued on down the sidewalk for half a block, then crossed back to the other side. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the man cross to the side of the street that Laredo had just left, walking at a diagonal, progressing down the street. Laredo knew for sure now that this man was following him. Was he the law? Perhaps a bounty hunter or someone out to prove something by taking down the Laredo kid? Laredo turned right onto the next street, hurried down the block looking for the first alley. He glanced back furtively to see if the man had turned the corner. He didn't see him. Quickly, he ducked into the alley, and there in the shadows, he pressed his back against the wall on the near side of the alley and waited for the man to pass by. Several people passed by as he watched, and momentarily, he saw the man pass. His pace had quickened now, probably fearing that he had lost his quarry. Laredo drew his gun, held it concealed in his coat pocket, and stepped out behind the man. As he came up close behind, he pushed his pocket forward behind the man's back and thrust the hard steel barrel brusquely into his spine. The man stiffened. "Just keep walking, mister. Just like nothing's wrong. And no, you didn't lose me, but right about now, I'm betting you wished you had." They kept walking, Laredo pushing the man hard. "The next alley, my friend," Laredo whispered. "Turn into it and keep moving." They turned in, and when they neared the end of the alley, Laredo grabbed the man by the back of his collar, pulled him up short, and slammed his back against the wall. He pressed the barrel of his pistol against the man's long, bulbous nose. The man squeezed his dark, searing eyes together almost cross-eyed, focusing on the hard steel. He did not cringe, but said calmly, "Just relax, mister. I know you are a real dangerous man and you'll kill me if you want to, but I only wanted to talk to you. I'm not the law and I'm not armed. This is about your mother." Laredo sat straddling a straight-backed chair and leaning over its back, his pistol still dangling from his hand as he listened to the man who was now sitting on the bed in Laredo's hotel room. The man had identified himself as Seth Bascom. Johnny's mother had died, and he had been hired to find Johnny Royal. "How long has she been gone?" Laredo asked sadly. 2 months now. That would account for the solitary letter dated 3 months ago. She hadn't cashed several checks that King Royal sent her, Bascom continued. King Royal checked up on her and found she had passed away from consumption. That's when he decided to hire me to find you. Why? After all this time? He never acknowledged I was his son before. Who knows? People get old. Pang of conscience, maybe. Things look different when people finally begin to realize their mortality. Anyways, I found your letters in her dresser drawer with your post office and box number on it. I've been here in Denver a while, waiting and watching for you to show up. I figured that was the easiest way. But I have to admit, I was afraid you would react exactly as you did, and I would be in mortal danger. He added a wry chuckle. You were lucky, mister, Laredo said icily. He eyed Bascombe beadily. There was something about this dark man he did not like nor trust. His narrow, craggy face was leather hard and serpentine. There was a strange look in his black eyes that sparkled not with light, but craftiness and something sinister. Besides, Laredo continued, you've wasted your time. I'm not interested in King Royal. Don't be hasty, son, Bascombe said. This could be a golden opportunity for you. For us, I should say. How's that? Look, Royal wants me to bring you back. He's paying me $10,000 to do just that. It's a lot of money, even for two. Meaning? Meaning that even if you don't want anything to do with Royal, go back with me. I get paid. I split it with you. We go our separate ways, both $5,000 richer. He grinned that dark grin. What do you say, kid? Laredo thought a moment. How are you going to prove I'm Johnny Royal? The old man hasn't seen me since I was less than a year old? Don't need to. He wants a son. Why? He's getting old. He has vast holdings and considerable wealth. He wants an heir. I thought he married again. Had another family, Laredo said. He did. Married a shrew that he can't trust. Has a stepson just waiting for the old man to die. Had a daughter with the old warhorse that's almost as bad. Laredo sat quiet, staring, listening, thinking. Think about it, son, Bascombe chided. It could be more than $5,000. It could be a long, prosperous life. Why not? Why not, indeed, Laredo thought. He had never wanted to be the Laredo kid. He never wanted to be an outlaw. It had been so long since he was the man he used to be and could never be again. He could never be himself. So why not be Johnny? Johnny would like that. Yes, he thought to himself. From now on, he would no longer be the Laredo kid or anyone else again. From now on, he would be Johnny Royal. He would be the Cattle King's son. Chapter 3. Wyoming. Vast, sprawling territory with majestic mountain ranges, clear rivers and streams, and rolling plains of lush green grass, where the buffalo once roamed in great herds, now in virtual annihilation, had created an open range of limitless proportions. The white man had taken the land from the mighty tribes of Sioux, Cheyenne, Shoshone, and Arapaho. Into this promised land came great herds of Texas longhorn cattle. And with them came men seeking wealth and power. Ruthless, tenacious men, willing to fight and gamble everything they had, even their very lives, to conquer and subdue, to prevail and rise above all others. These were the men who became the wealthy, the powerful cattle barons, and some, seeking the most power of all, to stand out from the rest, became a cattle king. Such a man was Kingston Royal. He checked his gold watch, verifying the time, as he stood on the board sidewalk in front of the stage depot of Green River and waited for the arrival of the 2 o'clock stage. Now, in his 60s, he still stood tall. His nearly 6-foot frame had not become stooped with age. He still sported a full head of hair, although now silvery white and thinning, close-cropped and meticulously combed back from his broad forehead, now etched deeply with lines adding to the distinguished look of his otherwise full round face. His flinty gray eyes held a trace of twinkle despite the shrewd, calculating hardness he exuded for public benefit. He glanced at the afternoon sun with its off-center glow of a cool day, as if confirming the accuracy of his expensive timepiece, which he placed back inside the pocket in his gray vest that matched his tailored gray suit and expensive range hat. The regal blue of the endless Wyoming sky provided a blanket of wonder above the towering mountains and the rolling plains. Billowing white clouds with a tinge of darkness behind them from the recent spring rains hung low on the mountain peaks to the north and west of the Sweetwater and the thriving town of Green River. Cattle had brought wealth to this growing town in southwestern Wyoming. The town now sported 2 luxury hotels, as well as 2 churches and a brick-building schoolhouse. Much of this opulence was owed to the tough, tall man who owned the largest cattle ranch in the area. Kingston Royal ruled his empire with an iron hand, and his influence prevailed predominantly in Green River. It was no surprise that law here was also tough. Lawbreakers were not tolerated and dealt with severely. As a result, Green River was a peaceful, prosperous town where people could raise their families without fear of trouble. The man in charge of enforcing this law stood next to Kingston Royal on the sidewalk. He was a stocky man with broad shoulders and a sagging pot belly that protruded through the galluses that kept his worn blue jeans from sliding down over his narrow hips. His name was Ben Stryker, and he had built a considerable reputation as a lawman, which that in itself had been a big help in wielding an iron hand here in Green River. Although he was paid by the town, he answered only to King Royal, and he was the closest anyone in the territory had ever come to being King Royal's friend. His dark round eyes peered out from under thick, bushy graying brows that matched his drooping handlebar mustache, although the latter was stained with tobacco juice and coffee. "I don't believe I've ever seen you so nervous and fidgety," Stryker said. "I don't get nervous, Ben," Royal retorted brusquely. "Oh yeah, I forgot," Ben said, a bit of chuckle in his voice. Royal turned and glared at him. Stryker wiped the half-grin from his gaunt face. "Stage should be along any minute now," he said, changing his tone and demeanor. Royal smiled and slapped his friend on the back approvingly. "Looks like right now," he said. "I think I see some dust rising a ways off." Again, he checked his watch. Right on time. Then he smirked. "Better be. I'll see to it Spencer's fired, if he's late this time. He'll be looking for another stage line to drive for." "Sure, he will," Ben chided, "just like all the other times you fired him." Royal threw him a scowl, his lined forehead squeezing narrow, hitching his scalp forward. He said nothing. Ben gazed off down the street, craning his neck, and watching the stage come into view. No further comment. He knew better than to suggest the old man was getting soft in his later years. Ben was probably one of only 2 people who knew Kingston Royal had occasional weak spots. To the rest of the world, he was tough as nails, a man of power and might. A man to make way for and pay homage to? The stage came barreling into town, dust churning beneath its wheels, carriage rattling, hooves pounding, leather trappings creaking, whip cracking, and driver bellowing to his 6-up team as he pulled them up to a halt in front of the stage depot. He set the brake, wrapped the reins around the lever, and was planting the stock of his whip into its boot. He grinned beneath his reddish-brown drooping mustache. "Right on time again, King," he gloated. 10 seconds late by my watch," Royal stated coldly, without pulling his watch from its vest pocket. Spencer ignored the remark. "Brought that special package for you." He winked. King felt a tightening in his chest. He arched his back and stood even taller than his usual stance and moved closer to the edge of the sidewalk. His heartbeat raced, and his skin prickled as the anticipation raced through him. Seldom had the great Kingston Royal ever felt this way. His mouth was dry, and his throat was tight, and if he didn't know better, for the first time in his life, he felt something akin to a touch of fear. He adjusted his suit coat lapels as he tried to contain his excitement and compose himself. "Good to see you again, Mr. Royal," Seth Bascom said exuberantly, with an oily smile on his lean, dark face, as he swung the coach door open and stepped down, hand extended in greeting. King ignored the gesture. Bascom noted the rebuff, rubbed his thumb and forefinger together as if absently, and stepped aside. "Well, sir, here he is. I brought your son back to you." The young man exiting the coach behind him was wearing a neatly tailored brown suit, white shirt with string tie, and shiny high-heeled boots protruding beneath the trousers' pant legs. He wore a high-crowned white range hat with the top caved in and pinched together on the sides. As he got his footing, he adjusted his cuffs with a shrug. The new Johnny Royal looked directly into the piercing eyes of Kingston Royal. Royal stood silently, making no move toward the young man. He looked him over thoroughly, sizing him up, deciding on the spot whether he liked what he saw or not. The young man was shorter than he expected, and his hair darker. Even though the Laredo kid looked younger than his age, this new Johnny Royal looked older than 26 years. But a hard life could do that to a man, Royal thought. And, even in a fine store-bought suit, this young man still appeared rugged with strong arm and shoulder muscles bulging against the fabric. As Kingston Royal sized up Johnny Royal, the Laredo kid tried not to show that he was looking past the cattle king and sizing up the man behind him who wore a star. The sheriff was slanting his head back and forth, looking the young man over also. His interest seemed different than King's. More quizzical, as if trying to remember something or someone. Was he recognizing the Laredo kid? Or was this just a habit the old lawman had acquired when meeting someone new? The kid tried to show no reaction. Seth Bascom waited, watching for the reunion to play out. He glanced from Royal to Johnny, almost holding his breath. Finally, Royal nodded to Bascom as if in approval, then broke the silence and stepped forward, thrusting out his hand to his son after a flustered moment of trying to decide on a hug or handshake. "Welcome home, son," he beamed. The new Johnny Royal, not sure how to respond, reached out and took his hand, stiffly and coldly, with a brief and slight apprehensive smile. "Sir," he said respectively, "thank you. Good to be here." He glanced briefly at Bascom and saw the man half smile, knowingly. Johnny's lack of response and warmness made the moment even more awkward. King forced the issue and smiled broadly. "Well, I think I best get you home. I've got a surrey just down the street. We have a lot of catching up to do. We can get acquainted on the way out to the ranch." Then to the driver, "I'll send Harka back to get his bags." He took Johnny's arm and started to usher him away, then remembering he had unfinished business to attend to. "Oh, Mr. Bascom, if you don't mind staying around for a few days, we'll conclude our business later. I'll throw in an extra bonus." "Fine," Bascom agreed. "I'm throwing a welcome home party for Johnny out at the ranch tomorrow night. I'll send someone into town to fetch you out." He started to leave once again without waiting for Bascom's response. After all, he had made his request, and Bascom only needed to comply with his presence. He really had no choice in the matter. Then he turned to Stryker and said, "I'm afraid in my excited state, I'm forgetting my manners. Johnny, I want you to meet my very good friend Ben Stryker. He's the sheriff here." "Yes, I see," Johnny said flatly. He stared into Stryker's eyes, looking for some sign of recognition, if there was any. He could feel a cold shiver run down his spine, but he stood firm, rock solid. After a pause, the old lawman extended his hand. "Glad you're home, son," he said with no particular intonation. "Glad to meet you, Sheriff." He returned the handshake quickly and moved away quickly as Royal escorted him on down the street. "See you tomorrow night, Ben," King said as they walked away. "Right, King?" Stryker answered to his back as he watched the two walk away. His bushy gray brows pulled close together. Something bothered him. He wondered what it was. A thin man with slight shoulders stood like a statue next to a fringed surrey that was parked a little farther down the street from the stage depot. A matched pair of brown mares, with all four white stockings, stood complacently still in harness hitched to the surrey. As King and Johnny approached them, the attendant's features became clear. He was very much along in years, and his narrow face was lined and wizened with leathery bronze skin. He appeared to be of Spanish or Native American descent, but he was dressed Western style with a flat-brimmed hat, leather vest, levis, and tall black stovepipe boots. He wore a cartridge belt with a holster on his left side, sporting an army colt, butt forward for a cross draw protruding and slanting across his middle. A sheathed knife was attached to the right side of the belt. "Harka," King called to the man. "Get Johnny's bags from the stage." Harka nodded and shuffled past them without saying a word or stopping to meet the new Johnny Royal. "Harka's my #1 man," King explained, watching Johnny take interest. "He's Yaqui," King explained, reading the question in Johnny's face. "Came up the trail with me from Texas 30 years ago. He's been with me ever since. He's the only man I ever trusted." Johnny wondered where that left Sheriff Ben Stryker, but said nothing. King motioned to the Surrey. "Might as well get in and get settled. Harka will be right back." No sooner had they seated themselves when Harka returned with Johnny's carpetbag, tossed in on the front seat, climbed lithely into the seat next to it. He slapped the reins against the team's backs and guided them expertly along the street. Johnny remained quiet, giving the town a good once-over as they rode out. It was an awkward situation, and he knew it was for Kingston Royal as well. But since the old man had orchestrated this reunion, Johnny left it up to him to initiate conversation. "There was no town here when I brought my first herd of longhorns up from Texas," Royal said. "Just raw land, plenty of grass. A cattleman's paradise, just for the taking if you were man enough to do it. There were Indians, and the land was wild. I fought wind, rain, and snow to make something out of this land. I did it, and now I control over 100,000 acres of prime rangeland from the Sweetwater to the Bighorn Mountains." The Surrey lumbered along at an even pace. The ride was smooth, and after a half hour, the town had long since vanished from view. Ahead, and to the right and left, were rolling plains of grass and vast herds of cattle as far as the eye could see, probably extending beyond the horizons to the far mountain ranges beyond. Johnny listened courteously, showing interest with occasional one or two word acknowledgments. As the miles rolled on and King continued with his dissertation on the rugged life he had lived and how he had forged an empire out of the wilderness, most of the awkwardness has disappeared on his part, and he was basking in the reverie of his past accomplishments. Johnny noted to himself how the senior royal had refrained from asking him anything about his past life and his mother. This was good, for questions might not be easily answered. "This is all Royal Crown Range," Kingston Royal said proudly, waving his arm about in an arc. "We've been on it for nearly a half hour," he boasted. "It will take another half hour to reach the main ranch house. I hope you like it here, son." He placed a firm hand on Johnny's shoulder. "I'm sure I will, sir," Johnny answered politely. "I hope so," King said, "but there is one thing we should get straight before we reach the house." "Oh?" Johnny's brows moved together. "This sir business has to go." "Hell, you're my son. You can't call me sir." "Well, what should I call you?" "Father, Pa. I've never had anyone to call either of those names. It seems strange to me." "I'm sorry I was never there for you, son. I understand what you're saying. Besides, no one has ever called me father, dad, pa, or pop either. Everyone calls me King. You can call me King. I like that just fine." "I'll just bet you do," Johnny thought to himself. He nodded and smiled politely. "Then King it is." The afternoon sun was waning and darkening clouds were filling the sky, blotting out the blue and quickly turning it to a drab gray as the Surrey approached the ranch house. The ribbon of road wound ahead of them, and soon the shape of the ranch house and surrounding structures became visible. It was an impressive house, standing tall and regal on a rise that seemed to grow out of the bottomland. It was built solidly. 2 stories high, clapboard siding, and shutters adorned the many tall windows throughout. It was a style more reminiscent of New England than of the western frontier. The surrey rolled through the open front gate of the estate. Split rail fencing extended to the right and left of the opening, and overhead, in wooden blocked letters, it said Royal Crown Ranch. Underneath was a replica of the famous RC brand. King's pride was swelling in his chest as he watched Johnny gape with admiration and awe at the opulence of his home. The driveway circled up close to the front of the mansion. It was wide enough to park a dozen surreys. Harka pulled the matched team to a halt. "Well, here it is," King said proudly. "What do you think?" Johnny sat silent for a moment, taking in the large yard, trees, flowers, and shrubs. Farther away were three low one-story buildings. Appeared to be two bunkhouses and a cook shack. On the far side of the main house, he could see a large, well-maintained barn and three corrals. There were several hands gathered around the front corral, and a rider was bouncing aboard an unbroken Mustang. Very nice, was all Johnny could say. His brain was racing. Could all this possibly be his one day? Was the Laredo kid finally dead and gone forever? It seemed too good to be true, a dream that he would surely awaken from. The front door opened, and three women stepped out onto the stone walk. The older one, with brassy hair which could not possibly be her own color, came out first. She was tall and thin. She held her pointy chin high as she floated forward, her long, expensive flowered skirts brushing the sandstone. She beamed with smiles, but there was a hardness and coldness in her eyes. The other two women were younger. One was very much a younger version of the older woman, but with curly brown hair. The other was even younger, and even though there was a resemblance, her features were different and somewhat softer, and her hair was golden blonde. King bounded from the surrey and stepped aside to let Johnny step down. He had barely touched the ground when the women were practically all over him. The moment was overwhelming, and he refrained from saying anything. King was saying, "Here he is at last. My boy Johnny." "I'm so glad you are here, son," the older lady gushed, clasping his arm. The other two crowded close. "Johnny," King said, "I want you to meet my wife, Florence." The other two, he pointed to each of the girls in turn. "Are my stepdaughter, Heather Thorne," he indicated the older brown-haired girl, "and my daughter, Lila." He beamed proudly as he introduced this one. Both girls were looking this young man over very carefully, and it was obvious they liked what they saw. The ladies seemed to all be talking at once, crowding the young man. "Hey, wait a minute," King raised his voice. "Give the boy some room. Let him breathe." Florence stood back. "I'm sorry. What must you think of us? We were just so excited to meet you." Then to the girls, "King's right. We did press him. Give him some room." They all backed off. Johnny adjusted his collar and regained his composure. "It's nice to meet you too, ma'am," Johnny said in a quiet voice. "I just didn't expect such an enthusiastic welcome." "Well, come into the house, my boy," Florence gushed. "You need to get settled before supper, and we are most anxious to get acquainted." "Just a minute, Flo," King said. "He might as well meet Luke and some of the boys first." Harka had already hurried off to the corral and had instructed the Waddies to come up to the house, and they were on their way. The bronco buster on the bucking horse in the corral had jumped free, interrupting his job. He was a tall, young man with broad shoulders and black curly hair. He picked up his battered range hat from the dirt where it had fallen, slapped it against his knee to dust it off, plopped it on his head, and followed after the others. "Johnny," King said, "I want you to meet some of the boys. You'll meet the others later. They're on spring roundup right now. These boys just brought some Mustangs in from the mountains and are breaking them. When they finish, they will be going out on the roundup too." He indicated each of the men. "This is Gordon Strutz, Pete Healy, Stubby Barrows, Red Potter, and Al Stone. Boys," he continued, "this is my son, Johnny Royal." They all murmured something in acknowledgement, but did not offer handshakes. Johnny nodded in turn. King eyed them all steely. "And this big galoot," King added, motioning toward the tall man approaching, "is my stepson and foreman of the royal crown, Luke Thorne." Luke stepped to the front of the crowd and towered over the new Johnny Royal and looked him over closely. He regarded the nice suit, clean shirt, shiny boots, and no gun. He seemed to sneer a little at what he saw and judged Johnny to be a bit of a dandy. At the same time, Johnny sized Luke up. He noticed a certain air about the young man before him. He was dark, with brooding features and a taunting cast in his brown eyes. He was sweaty and dusty. His jeans and leather chaps hung loosely around lean hips, and a pistol rode low in a holster on his right side. He looked like he knew how to use it. Johnny recognized this man as a rugged, tough man indeed. "Well, howdy there, Slick," Luke said with a broad smile on his face and extending his big hand forward. Johnny took it. "Glad to meet you, Luke." He winced from Luke's vice-like grip. "Ah, did I hurt you, Slick?" Luke said, releasing his grip. "I swear, sometimes I don't know my own strength." No, Johnny answered meekly, not wanting to start anything, and pulling his hand back. It was obvious from the get-go that Luke was prodding him. King glared at Luke. Luke disregarded it and grinned coyly. "All right, Luke boys, you've met him. Now get back to work." Luke smirked. "See you around, Slick," and strode off, the men following behind him. King turned to Johnny. "Let's get you settled, son." He ushered him toward the doorway. He offered no apology for Luke or his men's behavior. He would let it go for now. Chapter 4. It was dark by the time Johnny arose from his nap. The Negro maid, Elvira, had awakened him with a rap on the door to advise him that supper was about to be served in the dining room. He had thanked her and said he would be right down. He had already been given a tour of the big house and had gotten a little bit acquainted with the ladies, as King had gone out to attend to some business. The house was impressive, large, and sprawling, and furnished very elegantly. He had met the staff of domestic help. Albert, the butler and groundskeeper, Elvira, maid and chief household cook, as well as Corinne and Darla, also maids and housekeepers. All were black and very careful to remain in their proper stations, much like the servants of the great plantations before the war between the states 20 years ago. He had been tired from his long trip and needed a bath and a change of clothes, so he had retired to his room on the second floor, which was larger and more luxurious than any hotel he had ever stayed at, including those in San Francisco. As he descended the plush carpeted stairway, he could see straight ahead into the large dining room. The long mahogany table was already set, and the family was already sitting down, with Kingston Royal at the head of the table. Elvira was attending with a serving tray. "Sorry to be late," Johnny apologized as he entered the room. "I guess I was more tired than I thought." He noticed 2 empty chairs at the table. "Don't worry about it, son," King said. "Sit down." He waved toward the empty chair to the left of him and next to Heather. He took it and sat down. Lila sat directly across from him. She smiled pleasantly and then lowered her lashes, not wanting to appear to be staring. Heather, on the other hand, did not care about being obvious. She liked Johnny's manly good looks and said so. "I declare, Johnny, I don't remember when I ever sat next to someone so handsome as you." Johnny was caught off guard and reddened with embarrassment. Flo, at the other end of the table, interjected, "Heather, you're embarrassing the young man. Mind you, he's family, not one those hands you're always flirting around with." "I suppose you're right, Mother," Heather sighed. "Old habits are hard to break." "Especially for you, when it concerns men, my dear Heather," King said sardonically. Then to Johnny, "You'll have to forgive my stepdaughter, son. All she has on that scatterbrain mind of hers is men." "Why, King, that is not so," she answered indignantly. "At least not all the time." She giggled and poked Johnny's elbow. Where's Luke? King asked, pointing to the empty chair next to Flo. She started to answer, but was interrupted as a range hat flew over her head and landed on a wall peg behind her. Right here, boss man, Luke said, bouncing into the room like a Cheshire cat. Always on time for supper, he said, as he leaned over to kiss his mother on the cheek. He dropped heavily into the chair and shoved himself closer to the table. He was still in dusty range clothes and chaps. You were supposed to dress for supper, King snapped. Johnny's first night here. I wanted everything special. Yeah, I forgot, he answered, stuffing a biscuit into his mouth. Sorry about that, Slick, he said around it, not even looking up at Johnny. Johnny tried not to show he was getting tired of being referred to as Slick, but King didn't let it pass. What's wrong with you? You knucklehead. What's with this Slick business? His name is Johnny. He's my son. His name is Johnny Royal. You got that? Royal. Yours is Thorn. Do I make myself clear? Luke pushed the remainder of the biscuit into his cheek and sneered. Clear. Then he continued to chew. The table went silent and the food began to pass. When everyone had filled their plates and had started to eat, Heather finally took it upon herself to alleviate the awkwardness and break the silence. You haven't told us much about yourself, Johnny. I'm sure we would all like to know what you have been doing with yourself all these years. I'm afraid that's not very interesting. Just drifting about, finding work where I could. What kind of work do you do? Heather, King scolded, don't interrogate the boy. I was just making conversation, she retorted. That's all right, Johnny said, deciding it was time he offered something to be believable. But like I said, my life is kind of boring. I've done most everything that will earn $1. Workhand, blacksmith, farmer, storekeeper. You ever cowboy before? Heather asked. Never liked it much. You good with a gun? Heather, King exclaimed indignantly. Luke looked up from his plate and stared into Johnny's cool blue eyes. Never had much use for one, Johnny said matter-of-factly. Luke noted the tone, then said lightly, You afraid of them? Luke! King became more agitated. Wouldn't exactly say that, Johnny answered, his eyes still steady. Heather quickly moved the conversation off topic. Ever been married, Johnny? Lila looked up in anticipation. Now that was something interesting. No, never, he lied, thinking about that fateful marriage that led him to become known as the Laredo Kid. You got a girl? Heather kept going. Johnny smiled and shook his head. No, not that either. Something the matter with you, Johnny? Luke put in. Don't you like girls? He chuckled. Or do you just frequent the houses and the dance halls? Luke, I've had enough of this. It's all right, King, Johnny said. Luke's just trying to be funny. He glanced from King to Luke and said levelly, When he gets funny, I'll laugh. Well then get ready to laugh, boy, King said, smiling smugly, because Luke boy is still dressed for work, so he might as well get out to the South Range and check on the boys with the herd. But King, Luke was suddenly flustered. I'm busy tonight. Sure you are. Out on the South Range. Oh, but King, I have other plans for tonight. Thought I'd ride into town for a while. Come now, King, Flo put in. The boy was only funning. Let him have his night off. King grimaced and stared across the table at his wife. I don't know why I always give in to you, woman, he growled. Especially when it comes to this overgrown whelp of yours. She smiled. He chuckled and gave a dismissing wave with his hand. Okay, but Luke, you'd better shape up. I want you and Johnny to get along. Oh, we will, Luke beamed. We're going to get along just fine. He settled down to concentrate on his meal. Johnny nodded. Conversation for the rest of the meal was light, and as they finished, Elvira was starting to clear the table. Well, got to go, Luke announced, springing out of chair and reaching for his hat. Stay away from the wishbone, King ordered. Sure, King, Luke answered glibly, snatching another biscuit from the tray as he passed by Elvira. You can count on it. He slammed the door behind him as he went. Yeah, King muttered under his breath. I can count on it. Then he noticed Johnny staring at him. He sighed and shook his gray head. Don't even ask, Johnny, he said with defeat. Then he brightened and his tone changed. Son, let's go into my study. There's some things you should know about. I want to go over them with you. And I'd like you to tell me what you think. I've been running this place my way for so long, maybe I need some new perspectives. Sure, but I don't think I really have much to offer. I'll be the judge of that, he said, and ushered Johnny across the hall into his study. Like the rest of the house, it was impressive, but unlike the other rooms, it exuded a more manly and rugged atmosphere, clearly reflecting the nature of the Cattle King himself. He had a large oak desk and comfortable leather chair behind it. Leather-bound books adorned the shelving that lined the wall on the right, and a large map of the Royal Crown Ranch and surrounding areas covered the wall behind his desk. Another door, which remained closed, was at the other side of the room. This appeared to be a doorway to the party room beyond, which Johnny had seen earlier during his get-acquainted tour. Very nice, Johnny said as he gazed about. Glad you like it. I spend a lot of time in here whether I have work or not. It's a good escape from those hair-brained women of mine. Can't be that bad, Johnny said. They seem nice to me. Oh, come now, son. You don't need to be so polite. Flo and her daughter are witches. But, he pursed his lips, they are my witches. Then he changed his tone. Now, Lila, she's different. Not that she can't be a pain, but she's generally less demanding. I noticed she's very quiet, Johnny said. Not usually. I think she's just quiet because she doesn't know what to say to you. But I'm sure she'll get used to you, and when you get to know her, I'm sure you two will get along fine. Bascombe had told Johnny that King's daughter was as bad as the rest. Well, maybe that was one man's opinion. Still, she was King's daughter, and was bound to have some of his toughness and ruthlessness in her. So far, she did not impress him as having these qualities. He would reserve judgment. King stepped behind his desk and pulled out the leather chair. How do you like this? I had it shipped all the way from Boston. Fine, very nice. Here, Johnny, he said, stepping aside. Try it out. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. I'd feel out of place. Nonsense, my boy. Try it, for me. Johnny nodded and reluctantly took his seat. He sank into the leather, and his head rested comfortably against the high back. King darted in front of the desk and gazed down on him. Looks good on you, son, he beamed. One day you'll take my place there. Johnny jumped up and came around the desk. Wait a minute, he said. Aren't you jumping the gun? After all, you hardly know me. What's there to know? You're my son, aren't you? Johnny didn't know what to say. Then was spared the moment, for King said, I guess I am a little anxious, but we'll get to know each other, and then you'll feel more comfortable. Then he stepped behind the desk again and said, What I really brought you in here for is, I wanted to bring you up to speed on ranch operations. Come here. He stepped toward the wall map and Johnny moved close. This area here, he pointed to a shaded area that encompassed most of the map, is the Royal Crown Ranch, nearly 100,000 acres of prime rich grassland, all open range. It used to cover this whole area. He pointed to the outlying areas. Then the federal government stepped in and allowed homesteading. With this much territory to oversee, I didn't see squatters settling on the outside edges soon enough to prevent them from filing on the land. I had fought and tamed this whole country. As far as I was concerned, it was mine. It wasn't necessary to file a claim at the time. When I realized that squatters were moving in, I quickly filed claim on what you now see as the Royal Crown. Over the years, many of them have been persuaded to move off the land. Yes, probably at gunpoint, Johnny thought, but didn't say. Now, all that remains, King continued, pointing to the top of the map, is 2 parcels of land I want back. This one is Harvey Darrow's Arrow D spread. Runs about 25,000 acres. Squatter? Johnny seemed confused. On 25,000 acres? No, King sighed. Harvey and I used to be friends. Brought cattle up from Texas together a long time ago. We had a falling out, and as part of the compensation for dissolving our partnership, I let him have 15,000 acres to go into business for himself. As the squatters moved in, he bought them out. The only squatters left now is this section right here. He indicated an area to the northeast of portion of the Royal Crown and bordering the south of the Arrow D. This is the Wishbone. Johnny remembered King ordering Luke to stay away from the Wishbone. You can see by the shape of this area how it extends this way to the north, and each of these sections, he pointed to an area running southwesterly and another running southeasterly. Looks something like a wishbone, and that's what Sam Corday named it. Corday? Yes, miserable old cuss. Lazy, slovenly, never did much work on the place. Lives off the fees. I pay him for crossing his land and to keep water flowing into the southwest position of my ranch. You see cattle drift up into the northeastern sections over here. He continued to point to that part of the map. They get up into the mountains and the breaks during the winter, and we have to shag them out to pasture down here, he pointed. It's good land there, and I need every acre of grazing. Johnny remained silent, listening intently and thinking. And in through here, King pointed to the northern part of the wishbone and ran his splayed fingers down the center, is a natural watershed. The spring rains fill up the draws, and the runoff spills into the streams over here in the western area. If he were to dam the area up or close it off to us, we could have a problem with a severe dry spell. Why don't you just buy him off? Johnny suggested. I've tried several times, but the old coot won't sell. He's happy to live on what I pay him, and I guess over a lifetime, that's considerable more than I'm willing to pay outright. Besides, he thinks that his slut of a daughter has a chance of getting her hooks into Luke and may someday work her way into the family, allowing Corday to leech more off the royal crown. Is that possible? No, not while I'm alive. I've told Luke to stay away from her, but I know he's been sneaking off. Then he added, But thanks for the suggestion, Johnny. That's exactly what I want from you. If there is something you can think of that I haven't, I'd be obliged. Johnny could have suggested running Corday off, but he was sure King had already considered that, and although he was perfectly capable of doing just that, he had not done so. Perhaps he just wanted Johnny to suggest it so he wouldn't look so ruthless. When Johnny didn't offer the alternative, Royal added, If I were like Harvey Darrow, I could just run Corday off. Actually, I'm afraid Darrow may just do that, and if he ever got his hands on the wishbone, he grimaced. Well, you see what a spot that could put us in. Johnny remained thoughtful, then said, Perhaps you could make the old man an offer he couldn't refuse. Chapter 5. The morning sun was just topping the far-off mountain peaks, its golden beams splayed like thin fingers reaching out toward the low-hanging clouds and casting a glow around their edges. A crispness still lingered in the air from the cool night before, and dew was still shining on the grass as the new Johnny Royal stepped off the porch of the great ranch house. The spurs on his shiny high-heeled boots jingled as he made his way along the cobblestone walk that led toward the corrals and barn. He was wearing a denim jacket and jeans and the same high-crowned hat he had worn the day before. The trademark holster and pistol of the Laredo Kid was packed away in his carpet bag, along with the $7,000 from the bank job, and stashed away underneath his bed. This Johnny Royal did not wear a gun. Luke and 3 of his men lounged in front of the barn. They were laughing and joking among themselves. Several horses were tied to a hitch rail to their left. The laughter halted when they spotted Johnny approaching. They seemed to straighten their bodies and stand erect as if coming to attention in the presence of an officer. Well, good morning, there, Johnny boy. Luke almost slipped intentionally. The Johnny boy was just another crack. We've got your horse all saddled and ready for you. He grinned broadly. Johnny glanced from Luke to the three waddies. They were smiling, but they seemed to be trying to hide smirks. "Sorry I couldn't get you a shorter horse, but we don't have any ponies," Luke chided. His three companions choked back their snickers. "But Jughead here is a nice gentle horse." He pointed toward a rangy hammerhead roan hitched at the rail. The horse looked sturdy enough, but his coat was uncurried and matted. Sweat stood out on his hide as if he had just endured some heavy activity. Johnny surmised there was more to this sorry-looking horse than met the eye. "Well, I like a spirited horse myself." He turned and plucked a coiled lariat from the saddle of one of the other horses. "I think I'll pick my own." With a wry, knowing smirk and a wink, Johnny pushed past the cowboys and strode toward the main corral. Luke pushed the brim of his hat up and grimaced dejectedly. His companions began to smile, but ceased immediately when Luke glared at them. Johnny stood outside the corral for a moment, looking over the cavy. He spotted a sleek black 3-year-old at the far side of the corral that paced back and forth, churning up dust and driving the rest of the herd away from him. This one should do, Johnny thought. He crawled through the fence rails and slowly circled the herd, moving closer toward the black. He played out the loop of his lariat, and then, moving slowly toward the black and speaking slow and quiet, he twirled the loop 3 times over his head and let it fly. The black sensed the flying loop and reared onto his hind legs, but Johnny had anticipated that and had thrown high. The loop spread wide and settled around the shiny black neck. Johnny braced himself, his high-heeled boots digging into the dirt. The black reared again. Not so high. Then again. A slight tussle. Then he settled down and pawed the dirt. Keeping the rope taut, Johnny moved forward, coiling the lariat as he moved. His calm, slow drawl seemed to soothe the beast. When at last Johnny had reached the horse and held him close by the loop around his neck, Johnny patted the animal's sleek hide gently. He took his time getting acquainted with him, and soon could lead the young horse to the corral gate, usher him through, reclose the gate, and return to where Luke and his companions were standing. He could see the disappointed looks on their faces. "How about one of you fellows get me a saddle and bridle?" Johnny said, more as a command than as a request. "Pete," Luke ordered, "get the man what he needs." Pete hurried into the barn and soon returned. Johnny deftly bridled and saddled the horse, and the cowboys looked on without a word. He was just tightening the cinch when he heard King Royal's authoritative voice. Johnny turned and saw him approaching. Lila and Harka were with him, one on each side. They were all dressed in range attire. "What the hell is going on here? What's Demon doing out here?" He thumbed toward the rangy hammerhead roan. "How the hell did you get a saddle on him?" "Wasn't ease," Pete started to say, but was shut up by Luke bringing his foot down on Pete's instep. "That's Luke's horse," Johnny quickly put in. A sly grin toward the foreman. "Isn't it Luke?" There was laughter in his eyes. Luke glared with anger. He looked from Johnny to King, a bit flustered. Then to Pete. "You idiot, Pete," he fumed. "You brought the wrong horse. No wonder you had so much trouble with him. Now put him back and bring me my horse." Kingston Royal stared coldly at his stepson and shook his head. Then glanced toward Johnny with a knowing half grin on his tight lips. Luke, unable to hide his chagrin, turned away and stomped off to follow Pete to the corral. On horseback, Johnny thought, the Royal Crown Ranch seemed even more enormous than it had the day before, when they had trekked across it from town. By mid-morning, he had seen much the ranges, valleys, streams, and waterholes that were so vital to operations of the great ranch. King Royal had guided him from one promontory point to another so he could see as far as possible, for it would take several days to see the entire spread up close. The old man was proud of his land and knew every acre of it. He spoke incessantly as they rode, pointing out as much as he could to educate his new young son as fast as possible. His voice was all that was heard out there on the range, as his companions remained silent. King guided his big sorrel stallion expertly with a steady, quick pace, and Johnny rode close on his left. To King's right, Lila in men's jeans and flannel shirt rode along on a perky pinto pony. Luke Thorne trailed sullenly beside her, and Harka, ever vigilant, followed from behind. It was mid-morning by the time they had reached the South Range. From a grassy knoll, they could look down on a vast valley filled with cattle. Cowboys were busy hazing cows and calves into the valley from the higher country. Spring roundup was in full swing, and the valley was a hubbub of activity. Makeshift corrals had been set up, horses were being contained in the remuda, cowboys riding in and out, branding fires smoking, and waddies hard at work separating calves from their mothers and snaking them in for branding. As they rode down the knoll into the valley, Luke separated from the others and rode on ahead to check the work and give orders for the day. After all, he was the foreman, and with King here, he wanted to make sure that King could see he was on the job. King glanced knowingly to Johnny. He knew that the real ramrodding of the outfit came from Luke's segundo, Denver Blaine. But Luke was Flo's son, and he had to cater to her wishes and let them both think that Luke was the boss. Blaine stepped away from the branding fire and walked out to meet the approaching riders. He was a tall, wiry young man of about 30. His tousled red hair spilled out from under his worn, wide-brimmed sombrero. An old, worn leather gun belt encircled his lean waist, but the pistol in it looked new. He smiled pleasantly through the grime and sweat on his craggy face. "Hello, King," he greeted, checking up on the branding. "You know better than that," King said from atop his sorrel as they came to a halt. "I know you've got everything under control." Then, with a gesture toward Johnny, he said, "Blaine, I want you to meet my son, Johnny. I'm out here showing him around." "Glad to meet you, Johnny," Blaine smiled broadly. "I'll have one of the men take you around and introduce you to the men." "Fine," Johnny said, stepping down from the saddle. King, Lila, and Harka followed suit. "Had some trouble out here last night, King," Blaine reported. "Oh, what kind of trouble?" "There's a cat on the loose. Killed 3 of our steers. I was just going to send a couple of the boys out to track him." "Good," King agreed. "I'll send Harka along. That way they'll be sure to get him." It was mid-afternoon when King, Lila, and Johnny started back to the ranch. King had taken a different route going back so Johnny could get to see more of the great Royal Crown spread. Earlier, back at the South Range, Johnny had met most of the men and had observed the progress of the branding and was very much impressed at what he saw. Luke had kept his distance and had remained behind with the men. Harka had gone off tracking the mountain lion. Now, alone with just her father and Johnny, Lila was beginning to feel more comfortable around her new brother, and the two of them had chatted pleasantly, getting along nicely. "You seem to be more than you let on, Johnny," she said at one point. "Oh?" He tried not to show concern. "I mean, last night at dinner you seemed to give the impression that you weren't all that capable. Luke thought you were somewhat of a dude. It's what Luke wanted to see, so I obliged." "Why?" "I don't know. It just seemed to be the right thing to do at the time." He grinned mischievously. King seemed to agree. The sun was lowering in the sky as the afternoon progressed. A coolness swept in as the gathering shadows enveloped them, and King decided it was time they should head directly for the ranch. He was throwing a big party to introduce Johnny to his friends, neighbors, and ranch hands that night, and wanted to be back in time to get ready for it. The trail they took led across a grassy plain and then wound upward into a narrow canyon. It was even cooler and darker in here, as the high canyon wall blotted out more of the diminishing sunlight. The trail continued upward with a small stream to its right, then twisted sharply away and turned downward. The footing for the horses' hooves was slightly precarious, as shale rock particles slid beneath their iron shoes. This made the horses very uneasy, especially Johnny's black, that was still a bit high-strung and inexperienced. He whickered nervously, and Johnny held a tight rein, easing him carefully down the slope. So engrossed was he in controlling his own mount, he did not notice the nervousness in King Sorrel or Lila's pinto. The trail flattened out and footing became more normal, but the nervousness of the animals still remained. It all happened so fast, no one could have anticipated the reason for the horses' reluctance was something more than the trail. As they rounded a bend in the narrow trail, King Sorrel snorted and reared on hind legs. King pulled rein hard and tried to bring him under control without looking upward to see the big mountain lion perched on the ledge up above. All of a sudden, the trail was filled with chaos as Johnny's and Lila's horses each reared and thrashed about with fear. Johnny was first to see the cat above. With a strong pull on the reins, he fought the black's resistance and forced him between the pinto and the sorrel. The crowding of the horses limited room for thrashing about and forced them to all fours. King was still trying to pull his mount under control as Johnny smashed into the sorrel. He was close enough to reach out and draw Kingston Royal's Winchester rifle from the saddle boot. He was almost too late as he raised the weapon and levered a round into the chamber. The cat, almost as surprised as the riders, sprang from his perch on the ledge with a blood-curdling scream. Its huge mouth wide open, exposing large, sharp teeth and drool dripping off its tongue. It was already in midair as Johnny squeezed the trigger, holding the rifle with only one hand. Flame belched, and the sound of the shot thundered through the canyon, continuing in repeated echoes. The big cat's body kept on coming, and Johnny ducked low, letting him pass overhead. He twisted sharply around in the saddle to see Lila was directly behind him. She took the full brunt of the cat's weight as it plunged into her, throwing her, screaming, sideways from the saddle to land heavily on the rocky trail. The pinto skittered away back the way they had come. "No!" King Royal shouted as the scene played out before him, and he slipped from the saddle to run to her. Johnny had already dismounted and reached Lila and the cat ahead of King. The big mountain lion lay still across Lila's lithe form, practically covering her with its bloody body. A large gaping hole exuding out the back of the animal's head from the rifle bullet that had passed through its gaping mouth. With strong muscles flexing, Johnny quickly pulled the carcass off the girl and shoved it aside. Lila was still screaming, lying on her back and shaking convulsively as Johnny leaned over her and pulled her toward him. He held her tight against his chest. She buried her face against him, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's all right, it's all over," Johnny whispered, stroking her hair with reassurance and tenderness. King stood back looking on with a knowing interest. Chapter 6. The big ranch house on the hill was ablaze with light streaming from every window and filtering out into the yard. Carriages and surreys filled the large yard and driveway. The strains of music mingled with the cool night air. Horses nickered and shuffled around the corrals, and all else was quiet around the great royal mansion. Inside, the party was in full swing. Guests filled the large party room almost wall to wall. Local musicians provided lively tunes and waltzes as well-dressed gentlemen and gaily gowned ladies whirled about the dance floor, while other guests congregated around the refreshment table and the large punch bowl at its center. King was at his kingly best, dressed in an expensive black suit and tie. He beamed with pride and relished the attention from all his guests, who he really felt to be his subjects. After all, he was king. Johnny, in his brown suit, smiled politely and greeted the guests in princely fashion. Harka, ever watchful, stood straight and tall in the far corner of the room, black hair slicked back tight against his scalp, and sporting a tailored black suit and tie. He seemed to just blend into the scenery as if invisible. Seth Bascom was one of the first guests to arrive. He was dressed in a long gray coat, brocaded white shirt, fancy black vest, and matching string tie. Obviously, a man used to fine clothes and a luxurious lifestyle. His dark eyes remained flinty, but still sparkled with a charm that was appealing, especially to the ladies, who seemed to be naturally enthralled with him. Shortly after arriving, King had greeted him cordially and had escorted into his study. They had some business to transact, Johnny heard King say. Johnny was sure Bascom was there to collect his fee for bringing home the prodigal son. A few minutes later, King and Seth Bascom were laughing and talking jovially as they emerged from the study. Each man seemed to be pleased with the results of their business. Seth eyed Johnny casually across the room. Something in his face told Johnny that Bascom now had his finder's fee. It would be some time later before Johnny could get close to Bascom without anyone nearby. He tried to make the conversation look casual. "You got the money?" Johnny asked in a low tone. Bascom nodded. "So when do I get my split?" "Well, that depends, son," Seth answered. "On what?" "Whether or not you stay on as the old man's son. If so, you're in for more than $5,000. But if you want to pull out, I'll give you your share then. You can't have it both ways." "You didn't tell me that was the deal." "Maybe you should have made sure you had it clear." Bascom smiled, gazing straight ahead, watching the other guests. "Well, what's it going to be, kid? Staying or pulling out?" Johnny didn't like being referred to as kid. He wasn't really sure Bascom didn't know who he really was. "I don't know yet. Haven't made up my mind." "Let me know. I'll be around." Bascom drifted away into the crowd. For the rest of the evening, Johnny had been kept busy meeting all of the guests, especially the young ladies of the community as their mothers pushed them onto him, finding him a most attractive and eligible bachelor. Being the son of a wealthy cattle king didn't hurt either. This was something that Johnny really couldn't deal with right now. There was no way he could remember everyone he had met this evening, but he paid particular attention to the guests that King directed him to as important figures in the community. Judge Lawton was very distinguished looking, with his silvery, full head of hair, trim body for a man of his age, and flinty, sharp eyes that exuded confidence. His wife carried herself with the same sort of regal elegance and grace, but she also gushed over Johnny as she presented their daughter, Sally, who was obviously taken with this young man. Across the room, Flo stood glaring. She had already staked out Sally for her own son, Luke. As she had told him many times, "Son, you need to stop tramping around and go after Judge Lawton's daughter. Someday, you'll be running the royal crown, and you need to marry someone who comes from wealth and power. One day, the judge may become governor, and that would put you in a good position." She hurried across the room to the refreshment table where Luke was bent over the punch bowl, filling his glass for the third time. He almost spilled it as his mother grasped him by the arm and pulled him around. "Luke," she said urgently, in almost a whisper, "get over there and get Sally Lawton. Just look at the way she's taking a shine to Johnny." "Aw, Ma," Luke groaned. "Sally's such a witch. You know that. Then she'll fit in fine with our family. Get over there and don't call me Ma in public." "Okay, Mother," Luke said sarcastically as he put his drink down and hurried across the room. Johnny was relieved when Luke swept Sally off onto the dance floor. He politely excused himself from the judge and continued to mingle. His biggest surprise of the evening was to meet Harvey Darrow. He was a tall, angular man with a strong body that stood tall with pride. There were streaks of gray in his black thinning hair that he combed forward to cover his receding hairline. There was a twinkle in his gray-green eyes that held an edge of wariness. Johnny seemed a bit flustered when the man offered his hand in greeting. "Don't be so surprised, son," he said. "Your father and I may not be friends, but we both believe in keeping our enemies close. King taught me that lesson a long time ago." "Well," Johnny said, "I think that's very prudent advice. I'll remember it." There was a tap on Johnny's shoulder. He turned to face Sheriff Ben Stryker. "I want to talk to you now," he said authoritatively. A lump began to form in Johnny's throat. He didn't notice Harvey Darrow walk away. "Something wrong, Sheriff?" "There just might be," Stryker said brusquely. "Come with me." The sheriff took him by the arm and ushered him across the room. Johnny tried not to show concern, but what the hell was up? Had he been found out? A group of women stood chatting in a corner, and when the sheriff and Johnny approached, Stryker said, "Johnny, I want you to meet my daughter Abby." What? Johnny thought. Was this all there was to it? He suddenly felt relieved and breathed out just as the young girl who had her back to him twirled around to face him. This time, his breath caught short. She was stunning with raven black hair that fell freely about her shoulders and framing her delicate face and accenting the darkness of her black eyes and strong chin. "I'd have been in big trouble if I hadn't introduced you, Johnny," Stryker explained. "She's been after me all night." "Now, Dad, you're making that up." Then to Johnny, "Really? I've done no such thing, Mr. Royal." "Oh, I kind of wish you had." He smiled warmly. "And it's Johnny." She flushed slightly, and Johnny ended the awkwardness by saying, "I believe they are playing our waltz." He swept her away, leaving her father standing there, his mouth agape. Abby could hardly get her breath as he whisked her onto the dance floor, and they glided about the room with grace. Suddenly, all eyes seemed to be on the couple. From across the room, Lila stood, looking elegant in her green evening gown, and watched with a strange look on her face. "They make a very handsome couple, don't you think?" she heard over her shoulder. She half turned to see Heather standing there, a knowing smirk on her face. "If you say so," Lila muttered with irritation, then letting her eyes drift back to the dancing pair. "You know what I think, Lila?" Heather taunted. "No, what do you think?" she said bitterly without looking at her and not really caring what Heather thought. "I think it's a shame. He's your brother." Lila whirled on her, eyes flashing with anger. "And I'm really glad he's not mine." Heather smiled and drifted away. The waltz had finished. Abby thanked Johnny and retreated to where her father was standing. Johnny smiled to himself and continued to mingle. The musicians were starting with another tune and had just gotten started when they abruptly halted. All eyes went to the front door as 4 new guests arrived. One was an older man of average height, but his sagging middle and drooping shoulders made him look much shorter. Stubbled gray whiskers dotted his chubby cheeks. He wore a corduroy brown jacket that was obviously second-hand, for it was way too big for him. His gray wool pants bagged at the knees and were tucked into the tops of badly worn stovepipe boots. "Oh, I'm sorry," the old man said, feeling awkward and out of place, sensing every eye on him and his family. "I didn't know this was a fancy affair." Then, to the 2 men and the woman that accompanied him, "Let's go, kids. We made a mistake." They started to turn. "No, no, Sam." King rushed forth, his hand extended. "It's all my mistake. I should have told you we were formal tonight and given you a chance to show off your best clothes. But now that you're here, why don't you stay? I really want you to." He motioned to the band and the music began once more. Couples began to dance again, and no more attention was paid to the newcomers. "I'm really sorry for the mix-up, Sam," King said, stepping behind them and shutting the door casually behind his back. "I wanted you to meet my son, Johnny." He motioned broadly for Johnny to step up close. "Johnny, I want you to meet Sam Corday and his family. These are his sons, Larry and Danny." He pointed toward a tall, thin man with drooping shoulders and a left jacket sleeve hanging empty without an arm. He limped forward on a stiff right leg to shake hands with Johnny. His words were slurred, but he was not drunk. His brain just seemed to work slow. His face was pinched, and he looked much older than his younger brother Danny, who was short and rangy, had an arrogant way about him, and was the only one in the room wearing range clothes with a 6-gun riding low on his right thigh. And this lovely creature, King oozed charm, is his daughter, Millie. She flashed a smile, knowing full well what King Royal really thought of her. Pleased to meet you, Millie, Johnny smiled warmly and took her hand. Although coarse and rough from hard work and chores, the hand was surprisingly dainty. Her long blonde hair hung loose and straight down her back, and big lashes loomed above the big round blue eyes that held a hardness. She wore a white blouse, cut low, and a full dark blue skirt. Both were shabby from age and many washings. I'm sure, she said in a tone that sounded brassy. She was gazing past Johnny and watching Luke Thorne dancing with Sally Lawton. She could see Luke glancing her way every now and then. There seemed to be an apologetic frustration in Luke's eyes. Millie knew full well what Luke's mother expected of him. Sam, I'm really glad you came. I have something special I want to discuss with you, King said, slapping the old man fondly on the back. How about we go into my study, and I'll get you something much better than the watered-down punch out here. He winked slyly. Now, if the rest of your family will excuse us for a few moments, please, all of you make yourselves comfortable and help yourselves to whatever you want. He ushered Sam Corday away swiftly. Danny seemed to sneer at Johnny and, hooking his thumbs into the top of his gun belt, swaggered toward the refreshment table. Suddenly, Johnny felt awkward, then decided it best to break the ice. If you will honor me with a dance, Miss Corday, I would be delighted, Johnny said, offering her his arm. At first there was a reluctance. Then she glanced once more at Luke and made up her mind. Sure, why not? She smiled wryly and took his arm. Once out on the dance floor, Johnny was surprised to find that Millie was quite a good dancer. She explained that she had worked in a dance hall once. You sure you want to be seen with the likes of me? She said bluntly. Why not? You are a very lovely girl. Ah, you're just putting on that high-toned charm stuff. I'm sure King's told you plenty about me. Not really, but I gathered that you're Luke's girl. He whirled her around and they brushed close to Luke and Sally. Johnny winked at him as they passed. Better not say that too loud. King and Flo won't like it. I'm not good enough for Luke. Is that what Luke thinks? Doesn't matter what Luke thinks or wants, she said bitterly. Sam Corday had been in King Royal's study before, but he was still awestruck with the lavishness of the room. He took his time admiring the surroundings before taking a seat in the plush leather armchair in front of the desk. King sat down in his chair and reached for the lower right-hand drawer. Sam licked his chops in anticipation, knowing what was coming. Make yourself comfortable, King said as he lifted a whiskey bottle and set it on the desk. I'll just pour us a little nip, if you don't mind. Mind? Hell no. I mean, thank you much, Mr. Royal. King grinned broadly, watching the old man guzzle it down. How about another? The old man set his glass down. King refilled it, and Corday chucked that one down too. Sam, King Royal said in an even tone, how much am I paying you for right-of-way across the wishbone? Corday set his glass down and stared with concern directly into King's face. 5,000 a year. You know that. You just paid for this year. Why? How would you like to have a lot of money right now? Sure, who wouldn't? Sam said suspiciously, what are you getting at? I want to make sure that the wishbone is always open to me. Well, sure. Why wouldn't it be? I wouldn't want it to fall into the wrong hands, King explained, especially Harvey Darrow's. You got nothing to worry about there, King. You'll always have that right of way. I'm a man of my word. I'd never let Darrow have the wishbone. I'm sure you wouldn't, King said, if you could help it. Why couldn't I help it? The old man's thick brows pulled together and his eyes squinted. King didn't bother to answer, just said, the point is, Sam, I don't want just a right of way. I like to own the land my cattle graze on. I'm prepared to pay you $75,000 outright if you sell to me right now, here, tonight." Corday's jaw dropped. "I don't know," he murmured. "It would take you 15 years to collect that much from me, living on that dung heap you call home." The old man flushed with anger. "Now see here, King Royal, it might not be as fancy as what you got, but you got no call to—" Sam, settle down. I didn't mean to rile you. I just wanted to point out how nice you could live with that money right now. I'll even pay you next year's rent to boot. That's $80,000. What do you say, Sam?" Corday relaxed and settled back in the chair. "Here, Sam," King said, pouring another drink. "Have another." Sam stared at it for a moment, then quickly picked it up and drank it. He set the empty down and wiped his mouth with his hand. He thought a moment, then looked King straight in the eye. "I appreciate the offer, King, but I guess I'll pass." Royal was silent. "No hard feelings, Mr. Royal." Corday seemed to tremble. "It's my home. You do understand, don't you? If you're counting on Luke and Millie hitching up and getting control of the royal crown, I can tell you right now that's not going to happen." "Now you listen here, King Royal," Sam blustered. "You can't." King interrupted and said calmly, "I only offer once. I won't make the offer again. Here, have another." He lifted the bottle. Corday gazed at it a bit wistful. "I'm afraid not," he said, rising from the chair and turning toward the door. "Oh, Sam," King called to him. The old man turned, his hand still on the doorknob. "I hope you and your family will stick around a while. Enjoy the party. I'm making an announcement tonight, and I'd like you to be here for it." He smiled pleasantly. The old man nodded and went out the door. Larry Corday was struggling with the punch bowl ladle, trying to fill his glass with only one arm, when Johnny and Millie came up behind him. "Here, let me help you with that," Johnny offered, reaching for the ladle. No, Larry stuttered. I can do it myself." He flipped the ladle quickly and half filled the glass and half spilled it on the table. Then he gripped the glass with his one remaining hand and shuffled off. "I didn't mean to offend him," Johnny apologized. "Larry likes to be independent," Millie said. "He tries hard." "What happened to him?" Johnny asked. "Some years back, he got caught in a stampede. Darrow's herd, lost his arm, crippled him up, and was kicked in the head. He's never been right since." "You hold any grudges toward Harvey Darrow?" "I'm not sure," she said. "Darrow did pay all the medical expenses. We probably can't fault him too much, but deep down, well—" "I see," said Johnny. "There's no love lost there. Is that it?" "I guess so." The conversation was suddenly ended when the band went silent. King had called the music to a halt and was taking center stage in front of the band. "Friends and neighbors," he said loudly, calming down the drone of voices, "I have an announcement to make." When the room went silent, he continued, "I invited you all here to meet my son, Johnny." He pointed across the room, and all eyes followed to rest on the young man. Johnny suddenly felt uneasy, forced a smile, and lifted a hand in a wave. "I can't tell you all how excited I am to finally have my son back home with me. It's been a long time, and this young man is just what the royal crown needs to revitalize it and carry it forward into the future long after I'm gone. So, I am announcing tonight that I am turning all control of the royal crown over to my son. He is to run this ranch as he sees fit. Everyone on the ranch will now take orders from Johnny." A murmur of voices went up in the crowd. Johnny was stunned. His jaw dropped. This was something he had not anticipated. Across the room, Seth Bascom grinned broadly. Johnny swallowed hard and forced a slight smile. Flo's face flushed with surprise, then anger. Her eyes darted to Luke. His face turned to stone, his teeth clenched, fists balled at his side. He glared at King, then to his mother, and to Johnny. With a surge of force, he pushed Sally aside and stormed out the front door. Millie pulled away from Johnny and followed him out. Now, everyone, you can go back to the party, King said. Have a good time. He motioned to the band, and the music resumed. King strode away. Sam Corday stood dumbfounded for several moments, then made up his mind and shuffled after King. Mr. Royal, he called, catching up to him. King turned to face him. Yes, Sam? Mr. Royal, I've been thinking it over. I'd like to take you up on that offer you made me. Sorry, Sam, King said flatly. I told you, I only make an offer once. He strode away. Corday fumed. Now he was really mad. He glanced around the room for his kids and only saw Larry. He rushed over to him and said, Come on, we're getting out of here. Where's Millie and Danny? Danny left with one of DeRose's men? Millie's outside with Luke. Larry finally got it out. Sam was even angrier now. Danny running off and Millie with Luke. Come on. He blustered and headed for the door. He found Millie with her arms around Luke, but he was not returning the embrace. He was furious, and she was trying to calm him down. Millie, Corday snapped, get away from him. Now, we're going home. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her away. Luke just stood there muttering, I'll kill him. I'll kill him.